Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going way, way back. Not just to the origin of life, but about 10 billion years before that. We're looking at the cosmic and geological history, the whole setup, really, that was needed for biology to even have a chance on Earth.
That's right. Yeah, before you get to biology, you need the physics and chemistry first. You need stars, you need planets forming, all the heavy lifting done by the universe itself. So our plan today is to trace that journey, starting, right at the beginning with the Big Bang, then watching how the elements got made, how our solar system came together, and finally landing on Earth during its earliest kind of hellish phase, the Hadean Eon, which somehow became habitable.
It's pretty wild when you think about the sheer scale of time.
Yeah.
The universe itself is, what, about 13.73 billion years old?
Roughly, yeah. That's the accepted figure.
And our Earth and the Moon, which turns out to be super important, they didn't show up until much later, maybe 4.5 billion years ago.
Right, so there's this huge gap, like 9 billion years, where the universe was just getting ready, setting the stage, creating the materials.
Okay, let's dive into that beginning then. The Big Bang. The name sounds like a Big Bang, an explosion. But that's not quite accurate, is it?
No, it's a great name, but a bit misleading. Funnily enough, it was coined by Sir Fred Hoyle, who actually didn't like the theory. He favored a steady-state universe.
Huh. So an opponent named it.
Yeah, and the name stuck. But the key thing is, it wasn't an explosion happening in space. It was more like the appearance of space everywhere all at once.
And the initial moments.
Yeah.
The speed of change is just staggering. We're talking fractions of a second.
Oh, incredibly fast. The sources mention things like fundamental forces separating, temperatures hitting trillions of degrees, all within the first, 100 seconds or so.
It's hard to even imagine.
It really is. You had this ultra-hot, super dense soup of fundamental particles, quarks, gluons just whizzing around. And in those first few minutes, it was actually hot and dense enough for nuclear fusion to happen.
So creating the first atomic nuclei.
Exactly. Hydrogen, helium, a tiny bit of lithium, maybe the simplest elements. But that fusion party didn't last long, maybe 20 minutes, tops.
Why did it stop so quickly?
The universe was expanding and cooling incredibly rapidly. After about 20 minutes, it just wasn't hot or dense enough anymore for fusion to continue. The conditions were gone.
Okay, so we have nuclei of hydrogen and helium, but not atoms yet. Why didn't electrons just join up with them straight away?
Still way too hot and energetic for that. The universe was flooded with high-energy photons, light particles. Think of it like a thick, blinding fog. These photons would just knock any electron away if it tried to combine with a proton. So you had charged particles, protons, and electrons kept separate by this intense radiation bath.
So the whole universe was opaque, like being inside a star.
Pretty much, yeah. A dense, glowing plasma fog. And that lasted for quite a while.
How long?
About 380,000 years. Only then had the universe cooled down enough, maybe to a few thousand degrees, for electrons to finally combine with protons and helium nuclei to form stable neutral atoms.
And that's a crucial moment, because forming neutral atoms means...
It means the photons were suddenly free. They weren't constantly scattering off free electrons anymore. The universe went from being opaque to transparent.
And that released light is what we can still detect today.
That's it, exactly. It's the cosmic microwave background radiation, the CMB. It's the afterglow of that moment, stretched out over billions of years by the expansion of the universe.
And studying that CMB, like with the COBE and WMAP satellites, tells us a lot.
A huge amount. It helped nail down the age of the universe, around 13.7 billion years. And crucially, it showed these tiny temperature variations, these ripples in the afterglow.
The seeds of structure.
That's the idea. Those minuscule differences in density were enough for gravity to grab onto, eventually pulling matter together to form the first stars and galaxies. It all started with those tiny CMB ripples.
Okay, so the light breaks free.
Yeah.
But then what? No stars yet, right?
Right. After the CMB release, the universe entered what's called the Dark Ages. It was transparent, yes, but there was nothing generating new light, just cooling gas and dark matter.
How long did the Dark Ages last?
For maybe a couple 100 million years, it took that long for gravity to do its work, pulling that hydrogen and helium gas together in those slightly denser regions until, bang, the first stars ignited.
And stars are where things get really interesting for life, because they're like cosmic factories.
Precisely. The Big Bang only gave us hydrogen and helium, essentially. Stars are the nuclear furnaces where all the heavier elements get forged. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, iron, everything essential for life as we know it was cooked up inside stars through nuclear fusion.
So our solar system, our planet, us, We're literally made of recycled star stuff.
We absolutely are. Stardust. The debris from earlier generations of stars that lived fused heavier elements and then, often explosively, scattered those elements back into space.
It's amazing. But even now, hydrogen and helium are still the vast majority of matter, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. In our galaxy, hydrogen is still about 74% of the ordinary matter by mass. Helium's most of the rest. All the elements that make up rocks, planets, people, all that normal stuff. It's only about 4.6% of the total mass energy content of the entire universe.
Only 4.6%. That's tiny. What's the rest then?
Ah, well, that's the big mystery, isn't it? About 23% seems to be dark matter. We can't see it, it doesn't interact with light, but we know it's there because we see its gravitational effects holding galaxies together.
Okay. So dark matter provides extra gravity. What about the other huge chunk?
That's even weirder. About 72% is dark energy. This seems to be some kind of energy inherent in space itself that's causing the expansion of the universe to accelerate.
Accelerate, so it's speeding up.
Yeah, which is completely counterintuitive. You'd expect gravity to be slowing it down, but observations show it's accelerating. And dark energy is the label we give to whatever's driving that. It dominates the universe's energy budget.
Wow. So most of reality is stuff we don't understand at all.
Pretty much. But let's bring it back closer to home. From this grand cosmic scale, we zoom into our own neighborhood, the formation of our solar system. That kicked off maybe 5.6 billion years ago.
Right. So how did our solar system form? There were older ideas, right?
Yeah, there was the old collision theory, maybe a comet or another star whizzed past the sun and pulled material off, but that's seen as pretty unlikely now. The leading idea, the one with the most evidence, is the condensation theory, going back to Kant and Laplace.
Which involves a giant cloud collapsing.
Exactly. A huge rotating cloud of gas and dust, the solar nebula left over from previous stars. It started to collapse under its own gravity, maybe triggered by a nearby supernova explosion, actually, another star death leading to new birth.
And the sun formed in the middle.
Right. The vast majority of the material fell into the center, got incredibly hot and dense, and ignited as the sun about 4.6 billion years ago. The leftover material flattened out into a spinning disk around the sun, an accretion disk.
Accretion, meaning stuff sticking together.
Yeah. Dust grains bumped into each other and stuck. Electrostatic forces first, then gravity. They built up into larger clumps, maybe kilometer-sized planetesimals. Then these planetesimals started colliding, pulled together by gravity, eventually forming larger protoplanets, and finally the planets themselves over maybe 100 million years or so.
And this whole process naturally explains why we have rocky inner planets and gassy outer planets.
It does, perfectly. Close to the young, hot sun, it was too warm for volatile materials like hydrogen, helium, water ice to condense into solids. Plus, the early sun had a strong solar wind that would have blown those lighter gases away. So only the heavier elements, rock and metal, could stick around and form the inner planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars.
Terrestrial planets.
Right. But further out, beyond the frost line, it was cold enough for those ices and gases to condense. So you could form massive cores that then gravitationally attracted huge amounts of hydrogen and helium gas.
Leading to the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, and the ice giants, Uranus and Neptune.
Exactly. A neat division based purely on temperature and distance from the sun.
Okay, let's focus on Earth. It started out hot, molten from all those collisions. What was the big consequence of it being liquid early on?
Differentiation. Gravity sorting things out. The heavier elements, mostly iron and nickel, sank down to the center to form the Earth's core. The lighter elements, silicon, oxygen, aluminum, formed compounds like silicates, which floated upwards to form the mantle and eventually the crust.
And that iron core is absolutely vital, isn't it?
Oh, crucial, because the churning molten iron in the outer core acts like a giant dynamo, generating Earth's magnetic field, the magnetosphere.
Or shield.
Our planetary shield, yeah. It deflects most of the harmful solar wind and cosmic rays. Without it, the solar wind could have stripped away our atmosphere and water over billions of years, like it may have done on Mars. It took a while to fully develop, maybe by 3.45 billion years ago, but it was essential.
And then there's the moon. Formed very early too, around 4.53 billion years ago. The leading theory is the big whack, right?
Yeah, the giant impact hypothesis. The idea is that a Mars-sized protoplanet, sometimes called Theia, slammed into the early Earth at an angle.
Must have been catastrophic.
Unimaginably so. It would have remelted much of the Earth and thrown a huge amount of debris into orbit. That debris then coalesced, clumped together under gravity to form the moon.
And having such a large moon had major consequences for Earth, didn't it?
Two huge ones. First, the moon's gravity stabilizes Earth's axial tilt. That wobble in our axis is kept relatively small, which gives us stable, predictable seasons over long timescales. Without the moon, Earth's tilt might vary chaotically.
Making climate much more extreme.
Exactly. Second, the moon's gravity tugs on Earth, causing tides, and this tidal friction has gradually slowed Earth's rotation over billions of years. Early Earth might have had a day that was only 5 or 6 hours long. The moon slowed us down to the 24 hours we have now.
So a stable tilt, a slower rotation, and a magnetic shield. The stage is getting set. But that first era, the Hadean, named after Hades,
Yeah.
sounds pretty grim.
It does, and for a long time the picture was just molten rock and constant bombardment. But interestingly, recent discoveries have complicated that picture a bit.
How so?
Zircon crystals found in really ancient rocks in Western Australia. These tiny crystals are incredibly tough, and some have been dated back to 4.4 billion years ago.
Okay, so.
Well, the chemistry of these zircons suggests they formed in the presence of liquid water, which implies parts of Earth's surface might have cooled down enough for water to exist much, much earlier than we used to think.
So maybe not constant hellfire, maybe just intermittent hellfire.
Possibly. But even if there were cooler periods in water early on, there was another major event later in the Hadean, the late heavy bombardment.
More impacts.
Yeah, evidence from craters on the moon, which preserves the record better than Earth, suggests a big spike in large impacts between about 4.1 and 3.8 billion years ago. So even if life had somehow started before then, these massive ocean vaporizing impacts likely would have sterilized the surface. It kind of resets the clock for the origin of life to around 3.8 billion years ago or later.
Before we move off the Hadean, how do we actually know these dates? 4.4 billion, 3.8 billion. It relies on radiometric dating, right?
Absolutely. It's the cornerstone of dating ancient events. It works because certain atomic isotopes, radioactive ones, decay into other isotopes at a very precise, predictable rate.
The half-life.
Exactly. The half-life is the time it takes for half of the radioactive parent atoms in a sample to decay into the stable daughter atoms. By measuring the ratio of parent to daughter isotopes in a rock and knowing the half-life, you can calculate how long ago that rock solidified.
And different isotopes work for different timescales.
Right. For really ancient rocks, billions of years old, you need isotopes with very long half-lives, like samarium-147 decaying into neodymium-143. For younger, organic things, like up to 50,000 years old, carbon-14 dating is used, which has a much shorter half-life.
And for the age of the solar system itself.
We often rely on dating meteorites. They're like pristine leftovers from the solar nebula, unchanged for billions of years, giving us that 4.6 billion year age for the system.
Okay, so dating gives us the timeline. As we leave the Hadean, Earth is cooling, the bombardment is ending. What about the atmosphere? It wasn't like today's.
Not at all. Earth probably had 3 atmospheres over its history. The first one, hydrogen and helium captured from the nebula, was lost very quickly. Earth's gravity just wasn't strong enough.
Down into space.
Yep. Then came the secondary atmosphere. This was built up from gases released by volcanoes outgassing and possibly supplemented by gases from impacting comets and asteroids.
And what was that atmosphere made of?
Mostly water vapor, H2O, and carbon dioxide, CO2. Plus some nitrogen, methane, ammonia, sulfur dioxide, lots of stuff you wouldn't want to breathe. Crucially, almost no free oxygen.
But the water vapor and CO2 were key.
Absolutely critical, because they are potent greenhouse gases. Remember, the early sun was maybe only 70% as bright as it is today.
So without a greenhouse effect, Earth should have been frozen solid.
Exactly. That thick blanket of CO2 and water vapor trapped heat and kept the planet warm enough for liquid water to exist on the surface once it cooled enough to condense.
And the higher atmospheric pressure back then also helped keep water liquid.
That's another factor, yes. Higher pressure raises the boiling point of water. So you had this warm, watery world under a thick CO2-rich sky. The water vapor condensed, formed clouds, rained down, creating rivers, lakes, and eventually the oceans.
And it's in those oceans that life is thought to have first emerged. We see the first potential signs around 3.7 billion years ago.
Right around the time conditions seem to have stabilized after the late heavy bombardment.
So let's recap the checklist. What were the absolutely essential things Earth had going for it that allowed life to eventually arise?
Okay, you need a few key things. 1, the right kind of star, our sun, is relatively stable and long-lived.
Not too big, not too small.
Right. 2, the right distance from the Goldilocks zone where liquid water can exist on the surface, not too hot, not too cold.
Yuck.
3, The right mix of chemical elements, thanks to those earlier stars, especially carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, the CHNOPS element.
Building blocks.
Yep.
Yeah.
4. The presence of liquid water itself, made possible by the temperature, the atmosphere, the greenhouse effect.
The universal solvent.
Indeed. And 5. That planetary shield, the magnetosphere, protecting the surface and atmosphere from being blasted away by the sun.
It really seems like an improbable confluence of factors.
It does. A lot had to go right. And even with all that in place, there was still one crucial protective layer missing in the early days.
What was that?
The ozone layer. O3. It shields the surface from the most damaging ultraviolet radiation from the sun.
And that didn't exist yet
Because there was virtually no free oxygen, O2, in the atmosphere. Ozone is formed from oxygen. That free oxygen only started to build up much, much later, around 2.3 billion years ago, as a waste product from the first photosynthetic organisms. Life itself had to change the atmosphere to create that final shield.
Wow, so life had to arise without ozone protection and then create it. What an incredible story, from the Big Bang's first moments to a planet ready, just about, for life.
It really is. You go from cooling plasma to stars forging elements to planetary collisions, core formation, moon formation, all setting the very specific physical and chemical stage.
It underscores how biological evolution doesn't happen in a vacuum. It depends entirely on this vast, intricate cosmic and geological history.
Absolutely. It highlights the role of both physical laws and, sheer contingency chance events like the giant impact in making a planet like Earth possible.
And when you think about it, we found thousands of exoplanets now, but very few seem to tick all those boxes for habitability that Earth somehow managed to get right.
It does make you wonder just how common or rare life might be out there. It seems to require a very specific, maybe quite lucky alignment of conditions.
A humbling thought. We've covered the first 10 billion years or so, the setup for life. The story of life itself is next. But understanding this deep history is fundamental.
It truly is. You need the stage before the play can begin. Think about that incredible journey, that cosmic lottery, next time you ponder where life came from.
A perfect place to leave it for today. Thanks for walking us through that immense history.
My pleasure. It's always fascinating to revisit.